Decisions. Today, we'll talk about all the factors that go into setting your weekly lineups, plus a discussion about fantasy baseball in 2021, waiver wire, pitcher preview, Hall of Fame talk, and much more. USA Today's Steve Gardner joins us next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, getting a little bit better from last week's cold, still a little bit hoarse, but feeling good and ready to talk some baseball. Mets won a couple of games in a row, so I'm excited. How about you?
I'm very excited because afternoon baseball means that I have something to do while I'm at work. I have MLB.com. I have it on my phone. I'm watching games. It's a great break from my action at work.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a great guest today. From USA Today, none other than Steve Gardner. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing great, and I'm glad that my work consists of watching baseball. So that makes me happy.
Yeah, fantastic. That's always good to do. And I was going to say, Steve also runs the labor leagues, which we're a part of. Actually, I'm doing pretty well. I'm in first place in mixed labor right now.
Yeah, how about that? I know you're a good player, and being at the top of that heap is quite an accomplishment because that's a heck of a league.
Yeah, there's nobody bad in that league. I mean, you got Ray Murphy, Ron Chandler, Jeff Zimmerman. Ooh, to death row there. If you don't mind, could you stop the standings now so I can just finish in first?
Sure. I do have that master switch here, but if I flipped it, and it would say that I finished last in a labor, so I'm not gonna do that. Sorry.
Well, a couple weeks, then you can flip it. You know.
Yes.
So we've got a great show today. Today's episode is our lineups episode, and we're going to talk a little bit of strategy and pick your brain, Steve, about how to set lineups, what decisions go in, and so on and so forth. So let's get right to it. A lot of times we have the situations where you're setting your lineups, you have a couple guys on your bench, some scrubs, but your star has only 5 games, right? They're not playing Monday, they're not playing Thursday. They've got 5 games, and you might have a scrub that has 7, maybe they even have 8 games, including a doubleheader. Question is, how do you decide at what point when to swap in a bench player for a star? Now, obviously, you're not going to sit Mike Trout, but maybe a third outfielder, maybe you would consider. How do you? What is the decision process that you go through in setting your lineups?
Yeah, I think for me, I look at quality stats versus quantity. I value the quality more because really, if they're a scrub, what are the chances that they will play in all 7 or 8 of those games? So, I mean, the scale is not tilted that far in the first place. And, when you have a better player, the counting stats could be comparable, could be equal. And, the batting average or the ratios with the worst player, they could hurt you. So in that case, generally, unless the players are very close in talent level, I'm going to lean with the better player even in fewer games.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, just because a scrub is scheduled to have 7 games, certainly if they're a platoon player or if they're not an everyday player, it's not going to be 7. It might be 6, or more likely the same 5 as the star has. Ruvain, how about you? What decisions do you go through?
I'm actually the opposite. I wanted the quantity here. If you have a star and he's playing 5 games, and he may play all 5 games, but there is a chance of a rain out. There's also a chance of him sitting a game, taking a breather. They want to give him some rest, even with the 5 days, even with only 5 games. I'm still willing to risk those 7 games, but not yet. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't drop. If I got the star guy, I want the star guy playing now. Maybe later on in the season, when I'm trying to get more stats, then I'll maybe think about switching guys out. It's also a matter about whether or not the star is hot or cold. Like, let's say I had Francisco Lindor. We keep coming back to him on the show. If I have Francisco Lindor and he only has 5 games, and I have another shortstop who has 7 games or 8 games, I may throw that shortstop instead, just because I may get the better quantity and quality there. When it comes to the top first 5 rounds of players that you picked, I'm sticking with those guys through thick and thin for at least the very beginning of the season, unless they're really, really cold or they have a really, really bad schedule.
Steve, do you ever look at the pitching matchups? I mean, if somebody is going to face Garrett Cole and Shane Bieber in the same week, and they've got only 5 starts, is that a time to sit maybe not a first rounder, but maybe a seventh rounder?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, you're playing a game of matchups, and if you know you're going to get a very difficult one or two very difficult ones, then that tilts the scales a little bit more. I mean, it's all a balancing act. It depends on what stats you may need more than others. A lot of times, I mean that makes sense too. So I do. Especially if maybe a left-handed hitter is facing 3 or 4 lefties in a week. That could be a determining factor as well. So yeah, you have to weigh everything just to see exactly which side you come down on.
So how early in the season do you pay attention to categories when setting your lineup? So, let's say you have a little bit of a gain in homers. You're in first place by maybe 5 homers in the early going, but you're a little bit light on steals. At what point do you say, okay, I got to look at my categories, and now I've got to tilt a little bit more. I got to play a John Birdie here, and maybe I'll sit Cole Calhoun for Birdie. At what point of the season do you now look at and say, I'm not just looking for overall value, I'm looking for gains in specific categories?
Yeah, in a weekly lineup, I think you can't really do that before the middle of the season because you're still, I mean, especially in leagues where you can trade, you want to build up some of the areas where you're strong. You want to get a lot of those stolen bases so you could trade one of your top base stealers to somebody else and help your team that way. I think if it's something that is way more, home runs versus steals, something that doesn't really have any intersection, then you may weigh it a little bit more. But for me, I want to accumulate as many stats as I can early on in the season and, maybe play the matchups a little bit more, look at the categories a little bit more as we get closer to the end.
Yeah, for me, for the John Birdie types, the guys who steal especially, I like to look at the upcoming matchups to see the pitcher, to see the catcher, to see what teams are being run on. Because I know that teams, when they come into a series, they get the intel, and they know, okay, you can run on this pitcher. Okay, you can run on this catcher. So if John Birdie is playing some teams like that, I might be, if they're playing the Noah Syndergaard of the Mets, I'm going to be playing John Birdie that week. Right, I think it's important, not just about where you are in the categories, but in terms of playing the stolen base type, I think you need to play that matchup and look for the series that you're going to play the guy more than anything else. I mean, if you have a John Birdie on your team, you drafted him somewhere late, and you drafted him with the thought of, okay, I'm probably a bit low on steals, I need to make use of him. I think that you have to make use of him at certain times in the year, not just when you're deficient, but when the matchups are better for him. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And if you're not going to do that, then why do you have him on your roster in the first place?
Right.
So it makes perfect sense.
And that's also when the 5 versus 7 games play in, because if you have a steals guy who's playing 7 games and you have a power guy playing 5 games, you should utilize those 7 games and put the steals guy in at that time.
I'll also mention about speed is that stolen bases are more prevalent in a typical season in the months of April, August, and September. You see a little bit of a lull in stolen bases in the middle of the season in June, July, and half of August until rosters expand and the weather is a little bit cooler. When the weather is hotter, it plays more power, less speed. So another thing to consider is you want to utilize your speed guys early and late. You want to use more power when it's going to be prevalent, right? If power guys go off in June, maybe play more power guys in the middle and have the speed guys play early and late. So just a couple of things to think of as you're setting your lineups through the season. Let's talk about a situation that comes up all the time, and even more so these days with injuries. It's Monday morning, and you've got a decent player on your team. We're not talking about Mike Trout. We're talking about a sixth rounder. And they left the game for hamstring tightness. Byron Buxton pulled up lame today, and we don't know of his status right now. I will know after the next game, but let's say it's Monday morning, and we're not sure whether he's going to play or not. There's no new news. All you know is he left the game early. Lineups lock at 1 p.m. on the Monday. question is, how do you set your lineups? At what point do you say, well, it's too good a player, I got to put him in no matter what? At what point do you say, it's just a risk, I need the counting stats, I can't have the uncertainty, just taking anybody, and sorry if I lose some stats from the player? How do you handle that, Steve?
I pray for guidance. I think it's really just a crapshoot a lot of the times, because even if we do hear information, we don't know if it's 100% right either. And we're, for the most part, just guessing a lot of times. I think, it depends on the magnitude of the player, too. If he's one of your star players, you can't afford to, at least in my mind, you can't afford to go an entire week, if you're setting a weekly lineup without that particular player. And so in that case, the downside of not having him in the lineup and missing out on 5 days, 6 days worth of stats is huge. And so I think in that case, you kind of lead toward hoping that he's going to be okay. But if it's a marginal player that you can replace with somebody who's kind of close in terms of talent level, then you want to play maybe a little safer. I know it also depends on your options too. If you're in a deep league, you can make those substitutions fairly easily. If you're in a shallow league, you can do that. But in a deep league, like in a labor again, I started this week Christian Yelich and Mike Yastrzemski because I didn't have any other options, and I needed both of those guys to be in the lineup. Well, Christian Yelich was in the lineup, and I felt good about that until he got re-injured. So you always have to worry about that as well. But I think I lean toward, if they're key players for you, the fear of missing out is probably the one thing that pulls me more than anything else.
Right. And you make a key point that it's not just about the player, it's who's replacing them. If you have just some scrubs on the bench, the scrubs aren't going to do that much for you. They'll hit a homer in the week, but you don't want to miss out on the guy who's healthy. If you do have some decent options on the bench, then you can be more conservative and just play them. I'll ask you this, Ruvain. What about the situation where it's Monday and you know that he's out? He's out of the lineup to today, right? So for sure he's not going to play the one game, but you don't know whether it's a one-day thing or he's going to go on the IL. They say he's not going to go on the IL, but you don't know it's going to be 3 games, 4 games, 5 games. Does the fact that the batter is out of the first game influence you?
You actually set me up perfectly here because I wanted to talk about Bryce Harper here. Bryce Harper last week was hit by a pitch. He missed 3 or 4 games. He played on Sunday, and then around 5 o'clock on Monday, they said he's not going to be in the lineup. What do you do with that type of player? That's the exact question you're asking. Now, if you read, quote unquote, the tea leaves and you see exactly what's going on, you have to get a feel of what's going on with the player. If you were to watch the game he played on Sunday, you saw he was swinging a bat and swinging in pain. There was one at bat where he couldn't even swing. He was bunting instead. So you saw that he's in a lot of pain, and there was a chance he was going to miss more than 1 or 2 games. Bryce Harper is one of the guys, he's one of your staples in your lineup. But if you already see this, he's missed 4 games before. You don't know what his status is. You know he's out ready for Monday, and you don't know what the rest of the week looks like. In that type of situation, you have a good idea that he is not going to play a few games that week. So if he's not going to play like 2 or 3 games that week, is it worth it to put someone else in who may play 5 or 6 games? It may be, because you also know what kind of quality you're going to get from Bryce Harper. You don't know if he's going to play and re-injure, just like with Steve, with Christian Yelich. You didn't know he was going to get re-injured. You don't know what's going to happen. But if you, quote unquote, read the tea leaves, see how they were on Sunday, look at the couple of games before what's going on, and you have a better idea what to do with the player.
Steve, you're a little bit closer than us to the players and to more of the baseball world. Are there some key words or terms that either managers say or the media or maybe the team would say that you would look for in making your decision about whether the player is injured or not for the week?
One of the scariest phrases I think that I hear is when a manager will come out and say that a player is day to day. That to me is the worst, because it doesn't tell you that they think that the player could have played. It doesn't tell you if they think the player may be out for a couple of days. That's the watchword where I just throw up a lot of red flags. And generally, when managers are optimistic. General managers tend to be less optimistic when asked about player health. And I think when managers say we think he's going to be back, um, I think that's where you have to take what they say with a grain of salt. Because number one, they don't want to give away information to the other side, and they want to try and be truthful with the media, but if they don't tell you flat out, we're going to give him a day today and we think he'll be back in the lineup tomorrow, then that's where you have to worry. So outside of not saying anything at all, which we've seen a lot of that with players on the COVID injury list, um, when a manager says day to day, that's when I start worrying.
I think that's fantastic advice on what to listen for, what not listen for. Yeah, I just taking the managers and just downgrading, I guess what they say, being that they
There's
are.
another word that I'm a little bit concerned about when managers say it, is they use the word a minor injury.
Yeah.
Minor can be anything. It could be like Steve said, day to day. It could be that they end up on the injured list. I mean, just take Anthony Rendon. He had a groin injury. His manager called it minor. That afternoon on Monday, they called it minor on Sunday, and it was put on the IL on Monday. So how minor is it if he's going on the IL? So you don't read too much into the word minor because it can go either way when they say that.
Yeah. Uh, what would be a major groin injury? I mean, that's
A
I'm not sure
tear,
what they would
a
say.
tear.
Oh, a tear. Okay.
Listen, Luis Robert does not have a minor hip injury. He has a major one. He has a tear. The difference between minor and major is usually just a sprain or a strain versus a tear or something like that.
You know, word I find funny is they say a contusion. What do you get when you hear contusion?
A contusion is a fancy word for a big boo boo. That's it. That's what it is.
So you're not concerned when you hear contusion.
It depends where. If someone gets hit in the wrist and they have a contusion on their wrist and they're batting, that's a problem. But a leg contusion, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to Anthony Rendon. He had a leg contusion when he fouled the ball off his leg. It's just a contusion, but they still put him on the IL. So again, it can go either way when it's that word.
Interesting.
I mean, that's basically a bruise, right? Isn't that
It's
a fancy
yes,
word
yes.
for a bruise?
It's a fancy word for a bone bruise. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we talk about fantasy baseball in 2021, it's time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Well, one of the trends we're noticing now in baseball, and for this year, a little bit in last year as well, that batting averages are down this year. So my trivia question for tonight is, how many teams currently are batting 220 or below as a team?
A fifth, six teams. I'm gonna guess.
Steve, what do you think?
Wow. Well, I mean, I wrote something a week ago about the batting average overall in Major League Baseball was like 232 or something like that. So I would say, how about 10?
There are five. I put down there are five.
Okay.
Five teams.
All
The
right,
Brewers,
close.
Oakland, Cleveland, Seattle, and Detroit. Now, the crazy thing about that is that the first four teams, if the season ended today, they'd be in the playoffs, which just
Are you
goes to show
serious?
that, Milwaukee, Oakland,
Wow.
Cleveland, Seattle, Detroit. Last year, only two teams batted under 220 for the entire season. Between 2010 2019, zero. Zero teams batted under 220. It looks like it's a trend. Another trend, the Red Sox are leading the league right now in hitting as a team. They're coming in today, they were batting 263. From 2010 to 2020, the league leader in team batting average has never been below 270, which means that either this is a trend that's just starting this year and is going to happen from now on, that this is the prevalency of the strikeout and not making contact, or this just may be an anomaly, that this is just 1 year that it's happening. We have no idea. And that's very hard to play, especially when doing fantasy baseball. Steve, how does this affect the way we play fantasy baseball?
Well, certainly it's a lot easier to get batters out and strike batters out these days than it has been in previous years, and that trend just keeps continuing. Singles are down, and hits are down, and at this point, I think that offensively, to counter that you may have to look at players when you're drafting, when you're constructing your teams. of specialists who have batting average as their skill. I mean, we talk about one-trick ponies for mostly stolen bases, or the slugging players that hit home runs and do little else. But now I think we may have to at least pay some attention to guys we know, like a Michael Brantley or Jeff McNeil has been that guy before, who have batting average as a skill, and maybe give them a little bit extra if batting average is in a category in leagues that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that I was very high on before the season, Raimiel Tapia, who I pegged as a good 290 hitter. That guy becomes more important. He also steals, so he was very important. But it also means that the 230, 35 homer types, who you think from in the past you'd say, oh, I can't get that guy. It's going to kill my batting average. Well, they're not killing your batting average. That's what everybody's doing. I mean, Joey Gallo is worth a lot more this year because that batting average doesn't hurt you as badly. So it changes the distribution of who's more valuable in fantasy baseball. That's what it does, and you do have to account for that.
And the problem we're running into this year is a lot of people who drafted players for batting average, like the Jeff McNeil, who's batting 230, like the Freddie Freeman, who's batting 202, like the Charlie Blackmon, who's batting 204, and so on. We thought we had this buffer, and now the people who had that have completely lost that advantage that they thought they had at draft day.
Although I will say, we're talking about April, too, which generally every season batting averages are lower. Now, we don't expect Freddie Freeman and Jeff McNeil and Charlie Blackmon, those guys, to hit close to the Mendoza line, but you have to think that those guys especially will get those batting averages a lot higher in the months to come, because as the weather warms up, so do the batting averages.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what I said before, that the hitting heats up in the summer, June, July. So, yeah, those batting averages will go up. It probably will end up on the low side, though. If you look at the trajectory and compare this year to some previous years, it'll end up lower, but it won't end up, it won't stay where you have the Detroit Tigers and the Seattle Mariners batting 200. That's just crazy. But also what we have is the fact that starting pitchers are lasting shorter and shorter into baseball games. You have closers, now committees. I mean, a lot of uncertainty. How do those things affect fantasy baseball for you right now?
I think for me, I've kind of expanded my idea of what it means to stream pitchers. I mean, usually when we think about streaming, we think of, well, this guy has 2 starts this week, and so I can use him in there in this spot in my lineup. I'm looking not only to those starters, but expanding the pool a little bit. And, it's not an exact science by any means, but streaming relievers too. And I think that's where, because the relievers are getting a greater share of the wins, a greater share of the innings than they have in previous years, you need to not forget about them. And there's some valuable, Jonathan Loizaga comes to mind as somebody who you don't really think about as somebody that I need to get in my lineup, but, he's pitching in high leverage situations for the Yankees and picking up wins, getting an occasional save, and you can't overlook guys that can be valuable just because they're middle relievers or late inning relievers.
Yeah, the middle relievers now become more important. They're now viable. I'll also say that on the top end, it also means that it pushes ace pitchers more valuable. Other than Luis Castillo, who was a second-round bust pretty much, everybody in that first 2 rounds are really, really doing it. I mean, DeGrom, Cole, Bieber, Corbin Burns, Woodruff, everybody's producing tremendous value. They're getting exactly what you thought you would. Sure, you have Castillo, but on the whole, these aces are really earning their dollars, and they're worth more than they would in a regular year because the whole middle isn't doing as much. I mean, when innings are down for everybody else, all those innings at the top now matter more. So it's making the risk of pitchers at the top less and thus more valuable. As far as the closers go, to me, it's quantity over quality. I mean, if you got Jake McGee, you got a lot of saves right now. Jake McGee was not a first-tier or second-tier closer. To me, and of course we're post draft. Just throwing a bunch of darts rather than spending all your money. If you spend all your money on James Karinchak, you did yourself no good. So
Hey, wait a minute. He's been great this year.
we had the same discussion with Ian Kahn, but he hasn't gotten you save, and he got 1 or 2 saves on the year. Still, you want that closer role for the saves,
Yeah,
right?
he's being drafted as a closer, not as a middle relief guy who gets a lot of
Right.
strikeouts like a Dylan Betances in the past.
I'll still stick up for my man James though. I think he'll have 20 saves by the end of the year.
Ooh, I'll take that bet.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent. Ding ding
Um,
ding.
so another question to you is, and this comes up a lot. Obviously, you run labor and you're involved in a lot of the bigger expert leagues. Question is, should we be changing some of the rules of standard rotisserie baseball? Obviously there's specific rules in general, but what are your thoughts in general in terms of, hey, we've got a standard. It used to be 4x4, now it's 5x5. Are you a purist and hey, we got to stick with the game, or are you somebody that really wants to innovate and really try new things and try to get the standard moved?
Well, this may surprise some people, but I'm somebody that really thinks that when you experiment, it's good to try things. It's good to see if something works. If you like it, then you stick with it, and if not, then you can go back to what you had before, and you didn't lose anything. The reason why that may be surprising is because labor is known as a very hard line, has old rules that have been in place for a long time, and we don't change. That is not necessarily reflective of my personal philosophy, but I think for what labor is and being a league out there for people to watch, I think it relates more to the leagues that they're playing in. And when we see things like labor was 4x4 back a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, and it switched to 5x5 because that became the standard that everybody was playing for the most part. We did not have a mixed league for a long time before we started the labor mixed league. So labor does change, but I like to have it. At least I see the mission of labor is to have it reflect the way that most people are playing, so the results can be useful to the most and the greatest number of people. But personally, I love to play in different kind of leagues, 6x6, or change the rules and make some tweaks.
Fair points. Ruvain, you have any thoughts?
I don't think things should be changed just yet. This is only going on for now, maybe 1 or 2 years. If we start to see a trend and these same pitchers not going so deep into games and not having the same closers and having closer committees for every team, that type of thing, then maybe in like 3, 4, 5 years down the road, then you think of a change. But it's too soon to change because you never know. Things may change back to the way they were. I'd give it some time. I don't mind changing the categories just a tad, but I want to wait and see if the trend continues in baseball for this year, for next year, for the year after that, and then we can talk.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm more of a purist. I think I like the standard game, but my philosophy is it really doesn't matter what the rules are. You give me the rules, and I'll figure out the way to win. I'll do the math. I'll figure out the right strategy. Maybe I won't win the first year, but I'll figure out in a couple of years' time how to milk the rules and how to play and what players matter and what waiver pickups matter. But I also do want to have rules that reflect what's in baseball. And I think for me, I also want to take luck out of the equation. I don't want to have rules that I just happened to pick this guy and he happened to work and there was really no ingenuity there. So I'm gonna describe a couple of different rule changes, and you tell me your thoughts on this. Steve, do you think in general maybe it's time to change roto leagues from batting average to OBP? Are you in favor of that?
I'll tell you, I think if we're going to make a change in labor, that's probably the first one that we would make, or the one that we're closest to making, only because, as we were talking earlier, batting averages are, going down, 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 and now, it's putting more randomness into it. When you look at major league teams and the importance of getting on base, is huge in the way that they draw up their offensive philosophies. And I think that makes certainly our game, if we switch to on base percentage over batting average, much more reflective of what managers are asking their hitters to do and the way that the game is being played. Walks are a much greater part of offense these days, because hitters just can't get singles with the way that they have been in the past. So a walk is as good as a hit in that regard and easier to get. So for that reason, I think on base percentage is a better reflection of what we're asking hitters to do. And I think that's probably a smart change. And many, many leagues have already done that. I know that Tout Wars has and others. It may become the industry standard before too long. And if so, I will not resist that change.
Yeah, I mean, certainly OBP reflects more about real-life baseball than batting average does. That's for sure true. Question is, do you like it in the game? Ruvain, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's like Moneyball. This is exactly a hit is just like a walk. It's the same thing, and I love the idea because pitchers today they're striking out a ton of people, but they're also walking a ton of people, and you have to give credit for the hitters for not swinging at bad pitches and getting on base and walking that way. That's the only way to give them some sort of credit. Yes, they may get a run if they come around the score and just like getting a hit. So what's the difference? There shouldn't be a difference because they're getting on base.
Yeah, for me, there's 2 points. I mean, one, with OBP, you get credit for walks. If you're in a batting average league and a guy walks, you're like, crap. I want him to hit. But in real life, if he gets a walk, certainly that's a good thing. I do find, though, that when you include OBP instead of batting average, it changes the distribution of values, and it makes it more stars and scrubsy. Like Mike Trout becomes an unbelievable player. I like it more where the players are a little bit more compressed and the values are a little bit more fluid. So from a mathematical standpoint, I actually prefer batting average to OBP. And, it's just my tendency. But I'm really not opposed to it. I definitely think it's right for baseball. Just mathematically, I like the batting average game. What about saves versus save plus hold? I mean, saves is such a crapshoot these days. And, there are some pitchers who they come in and they face the eighth inning. They're great pitchers. Just for whatever reason, the manager doesn't want to give them the role because maybe there's another guy who has to pitch in the ninth, whatever. Is it time, do you think, to change to save plus hold instead of just saves?
I'll tell you what, I'm playing in my first saves plus holds league this year, and it's interesting. I kind of like it. There are some aspects that I like about it. I mean, it opens up the waiver wire, and more pitchers are valuable. It gives credit to those pitchers who get the job done and doesn't depend on the manager's whims of he didn't like this guy or this guy, and somebody failed 2 nights in a row and so he's out as closer. But I still think there's a part of me that says you should be able to be rewarded for your skill in predicting who the manager is going to tab for that ninth inning role, because I think most managers do believe that the ninth inning is still the most important inning and they want their best pitcher there. So I'd like to have some sort of balance in there. Maybe if I could, ultimately do it the way I wanted, maybe like count saves twice and holds once, because you can have multiple holds in a game too. So maybe emphasize the saves there, but still give credit for the holds.
Right. I do think, though, that in baseball, it's with analytics, it's become a little bit more that you may not put the best guy in the ninth. Sometimes you get the more high leverage situations. I know the Mets were using Seth Lugo, who was the better reliever last year, not in the ninth, but in whatever the high leverage situation was. So I'm not sure that holds anymore in baseball, that, your best pitcher's got to pitch the ninth. So because of that, maybe I'd consider save plus hold. The problem is that both of them are just fickle categories. I mean, a save, you have to be within 3 runs. I mean, what if a pitcher comes in when you're up 4-0? That's no good. I don't like the category in general. I'm not sure if it's right to drop because we want to give credit to relievers. So yeah, maybe I'm with you. Maybe we need something like 2 times saves plus holds, and just to throw in a little bit of a credit of a hold, and that maybe changes the distribution and doesn't put the elite closers such a high value, and lets you play a little bit more of the middle relievers more. Ruvain, you have any thoughts?
I was in a points league a couple of years ago that had the saves plus holds. You get like 1.5. It was a points league. You get 1.5 points for it was a head to head. 1.5 points per save and a half a point for a hold. It screwed everybody up because I seem to be like the only one using the holds part, and I was just racking up these holds, and then my holds guys sometimes turn into the closer, and then you locked into it. I'm more of a purist. I want just plain saves. If you can figure out who's going to be the closer, great. If you luck into it, like you said, Ariel, great also. But you know what? There is something to say about waiting every Sunday night to see who wins the fab, to see if you get that potential closer, to see how much money everyone's going to spend on the potential closer. If you do saves plus hold, you're not going to have that anymore. You're going to get a lot more players picked up on fab every weekend, and people are going to use up their money a lot quicker also.
What about the wins category? You think, Steve, that it might be time to drop wins as a category? Should we be going more the route of change it to innings pitched, because that's really what you're getting credit for? Should we go the route of adding quality starts and saying make it wins plus quality starts? What is your philosophy on what we should do with wins?
Well, I'm not in the kill the win camp. I think that there should be a win in every game. You should have a winning pitcher, and I think that what we need to do in fantasy is figure out what we want to reward. Do we want to reward pitchers for doing their job? That's where the innings might come in. I kind of like the wins plus quality starts, to tell you the truth. And I've written and advocated for that before because you want to give dominant pitchers credit for doing their job. But yet you also reward those pitchers who have bad luck and don't end up, with bad bullpens, things like that. You want to at least give them some way to be successful and contribute to your fantasy team. So I think when you look at it too, a lot of people don't like quality starts because they say, oh, it's a 4.50 ERA. Well, that's just the minimum. And most of the time, if you pitch a quality start, you're going to be better than the minimum. So it is a good outing most of the time. So I kind of think, yes, you need a win somehow because for relief pitchers that come in and do the job, they come in a tie game, that's their game. And if they can hold the opponent scoreless and have their team score, they deserve some credit for that. So I like the wins to still be part of it, but adding the quality starts, especially now where starting pitchers don't go 6 innings as often, reward those guys that do.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't want to drop wins the category because that's what the game's all about. And if you look at the list of wins plus quality starts, you'll actually see probably a more robust list of what you would consider aces. I mean, if you just look at wins over the last couple of years, look at Jacob deGrom. He's not even close to the top. But if you look at quality starts, he's number one. And if you look at wins plus quality starts, yeah, he's right there in the thick of it on the top. So I like the list that gets produces. My beef is just the definition of win and the definition of quality start. I mean, why do we have to reward somebody that pitched well but only has to pitch 5 innings? If a pitcher pitches 4 innings, and just because the environment of baseball is we're taking pitchers out earlier, why does the pitcher lose the win? Why does he? Let's say there's a rain delay after 4 2/3 inning. They're not going to put the pitcher back. Why does he all of a sudden lose the win? I think that the definition of a win should reduce. I think the 5-inning rule should go down. Maybe it should go to 4, or maybe I would even advocate for 3. For quality start, I think that maybe the definition should change also. Maybe it should go to 5 innings instead of 6. So I'm more for changing the definition. I'm less for changing the category, if that makes sense.
I want to add one other thing. If we keep these 7-inning doubleheader games, I think the status of a quality start should be 5 innings instead of 6 innings for a 7-inning game. If we're playing 7 innings, then the quality start should be 5 innings. If you're playing 9 innings, quality starts 6 innings. That's 2/3. So why not do 5 innings for a 7-inning? I mean, the game counts the same. It's almost impossible. I mean, people are going to be treating these 7-inning games differently than other games. If you have a starter who's not doing that well in the 4th inning and you want to use your bullpen, that's fine because the 4th inning is technically the 7th inning, 6th inning. So you technically should. I mean, a lot of managers don't, but they technically should be treating these games differently just because they're 7 innings, and we should actually treat them differently also. also. Like the whole thing with Madison Bumgarner not really having a no-hitter because it's 7 innings. No, that he's playing by the rules. He pitched 7 innings. He pitched a complete game, which is a full game, and he got a no-hitter. It should be considered a no-hitter.
Yeah, well, I agree that it should be a no-hitter. And here's the thing. It's one thing if you tell me that he did not pitch a complete game, but actually Major League Baseball considers that 7-inning game to be a complete game. To me, if you're going to give credit for the complete game, you should give credit for the no-hitter, right? I'm okay if you say it's not a no-hitter, but we're not going to call it a complete game unless it's 9 innings. I'm fine with that. But he did pitch the entire game. He didn't split it up with anybody, and he didn't give up any hits. I think it was a no-hitter. You agree, Steve?
Think about this, though. Nolan Ryan had 23 games where he took a no-hitter into the 7th inning. How do you think Nolan Ryan feels about Madison Bumgarner claiming that he pitched a no-hitter in 7 innings when Nolan Ryan had 23 of those kinds of games? No, you have to go. I think the simple solution to all of this controversy is to do away with the 7-inning doubleheaders. I
agree.
them.
Yeah,
So that's what's causing all the unnecessary confusion and debate and hard feelings. Just do away with those 7-inning doubleheaders. Play 9 innings. Make that regulation, and then we can talk.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that they did it last year because of COVID, whatever. But we're back. We're about to let full capacity stadiums, over the summer. Yeah, they should do away with it. It's terrible for the record books. It really is. Well, just quickly, what are your thoughts on the extra inning rule with all of a sudden a runner on second base?
I'm not a fan of that either, because what it does is it encourages, a lot of runs scored without the benefit of a hit. I mean, we saw there was a game the other night, 1 run scored in the top of the 10th, 1 in the bottom of the 10th, 1 run scored in the top of the 11th. Is that really what we want too? We want to see a ground out, a fly ball, and a run score? That doesn't mean action to me. So no, I'm not a fan of that either.
Let's just break out the home run derby after the 12th inning and be done.
No, I mean, I'll say this. Let's play, kind of work it like the NHL. Play regular rules in the 10th inning, the 11th inning, or the 12th inning, or whatever, whatever point you want to say. And then if you have to, you don't like those games that extend, 18 innings and all that sort of stuff and blow your pitcher's arms out, whatever. You want to end it, that's fine. But I do not like the extra inning rule at all.
And what's the point if you're doing it during the season when in the postseason that rule is going to go away? So you're playing by different rules in the season than you were during the postseason, which again makes no sense.
Yep, I agree. Let's do the waiver wire. That's where we talk about a few potential players to pick up that you might want to consider for your teams. Steve, who's a player or two that you think that owners should be looking at to pick up this week on the wire?
All right, I'll go first. I'm going to go with Tony Gonsolin, who's only owned in 43% of CBS leagues right now, which is just unimaginable. Dustin May is out. Gonsolin is supposed to be back in 2 to 3 weeks. This is the week to get him because he's still available in more than half the leagues, and he'll be cheaper now than he will be as soon as he's about to come back. Another guy who I was going to mention, and I'm sort of hesitant to mention now because the way he pitched today, but John Gant. He's owned in only 21% of CBS leagues. It seems to me he walks everybody who doesn't strike out or get out. His ERA is great. He's striking out people, but his whip is ungodly and he has too many walks. But he also goes deep into games, and he's going to keep his spot. He's going to keep his spot in the rotation at least until Miles Mikolas comes back, and we don't even know when that's going to happen. So those are two guys that are not many owned in leagues, but still available, and you should grab them now because this is the time to get them.
Yeah, with Gant, it's just a lot of walks. But he is getting a lot of wins, and his schedule is actually very favorable coming up. His next start is Milwaukee, which is a good team to pitch against, and then Pittsburgh, another good team to pitch against. Then he's going to be a 2-star pitcher the following week. It's a good schedule. If your whip can take it a little bit, and if you need the wins, I definitely recommend John Gant as well. I'm going to throw in a couple of other guys. Josh Rojas, that's an Alex Chamberlain pick. He's heating up. He's under 50% owned on CBS. Eligible at second base shortstop. He's got a nice power speed combo when he's hot. The Arizona Diamondbacks are fantastic so far in offense this year, and he's playing every day. How about Cole Irvin? 50%. Oakland has a knack for producing some good pitching. He looked really good against Toronto the other day. 8 innings pitched against them. 9 strikeouts, 3 hits against a really good team. He's got a 3 ERA, and his FIP, ex-FIP, Sierra, they say that he's, mid to upper threes in terms of ERA. So that's somebody really in a deep league to have a flyer on. I'll also add in a couple of hitters that are interesting. Mike Tauchman, 15% owned. He's now going to be batting closer to every day, especially as Yastrzemski is until he comes back. He is the number one weighted plate discipline index player according to my MPDI metrics in all of baseball. So just take a look at him. Brandon Belt is actually fourth on my list as well. He's 25% owned. If you had Joey Votto at corner, he's probably a good replacement. Brandon Belt's best month of his career is always May. He has nearly a 280 batting average career in May, and he's healthy now. So I really recommend Belt. And also Harrison Bader, only 10% owned. That is completely under what it should be. He is a 15-15 type power speed threat. He's healthy now. Good defender. He made a great catch in the Met game today. He should be picked up in all deep leagues immediately. Harrison Bader. Anyone else to add, Steve?
I look at my leagues and I play in such deep leagues that none of these guys seem to be available to me. And, it's very sad. So, it obviously, when you're talking about, the size of your leagues, it's what matters. And getting those guys, like you were talking about Tony Gonsolin, who, if you can pick up guys that are on the injured list ahead of their return, it's huge. In a TGFBI league I was in, somebody got Tony Gonsolin last week for $2 out of $1,000 cap. That's huge. You can stash that guy on your bench. So I think you guys have hit on a lot of those. And I would follow your advice rather than trying for me to dig to the Pablo Sandovals and Alex Blandinos of the world.
Yeah. The thing, you mentioned getting Tony Gonsolin cheap. If you waited and you say, well, I don't want to burn my roster spot, but if you wait 2 weeks until he's just a couple days away from starting, if on Fab, he'd be $150 potentially. But if you get him now, it's $2 out of 1,000, and you just got to stash him for 2 weeks. The return on investment is so much better by just using him on the bench for 2 weeks for $2 rather than.
And I will say, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm saying rather than pick him up last minute, and who knows if you can even get him. Somebody else might even pay $200.
Yeah, and I think, too, what we're seeing or will be seeing in the future is not only, those injured guys, but some of the minor league prospects. Because now that the minor league season has begun, you're not going to call up for the most part. Nick Gordon came up for the Twins right away and stole a couple of bases. So maybe he's a guy that in a deep league you might want to look at. But those prospects that get a couple of weeks under their belts and are ready to contribute to the big league team. If some of those guys are on your radar, maybe now's the time to spring and catch those guys before they get a lot of hype of, hit 3 home runs in 4 days in their AAA game.
1,000%. Pitcher preview. It's where we highlight maybe a potential good two-start pitcher matchup or one key start matchup, and hopefully you won't get Gomber this week. Gombard, by the way, if we've seen that floating around, to me the definition of Gombard is where you see a good matchup from a pitcher, looks like they're playing crappy teams. There are some red flags with the pitcher. Maybe they walk a lot, but you pick them up anyways, and they just shell you for 7 earned runs against not even a good team. Ruvain, do you have anybody to potentially pick up that might help you this week?
Yeah, I actually have 2 players I want to mention. The first guy is not that much owned in a lot of leagues. I'm talking about Martin Perez for the Red Sox. In his last 3 starts, he's pitched 15 innings with 16 strikeouts with a 3 ERA, and he's at Baltimore and against the Angels. That's not that bad of a setup for him. He's only 9% owned in CBS, so you can probably get him off the waiver wire very easy. And another guy I want to mention who's more owned, this is a guy that 60% people have him, but only 30% play him, that's Brady Singer. Brady Singer has done pretty well as long as Angel Hernandez is not umping. He's done pretty well, and he's got a very favorable matchup. He's at Detroit and at the Chicago White Sox, and their lineup is getting beat up because of all these injuries. So if you have him, you must play him. If you don't play him, why do you have him on your roster?
I'll throw one name out. Aaron Sanchez, 25% owned. His matchup this week to start versus Texas and at Pittsburgh. The only thing is he has not gone yet more than 5 innings pitched. So a little bit wary about getting a win. But in the time he has, he's been decent. He has a 3.18 ERA, 1.3 WHIP, 24 strikeouts in 28 innings. And what I look at for blow-ups is ground ball rate. His ground ball rate is over 55%. So that limits some of the blow-up damage, and maybe he won't get gombered if he does. And good park, and plays on actually a good team right now record-wise. So Aaron Sanchez, if he's available in your league. Anyone to add, Steve?
Yeah, those were two guys that I had starred on my sheet. So kudos. I think we're all in agreement there. The other guy that I might think about going a little bit deeper is Albert Alzolay of the Cubs. Matchup at Cleveland, at Detroit. I mean, if you can get Detroit, I think that's where you tend to get gombered, is when you see that second matchup that you're really looking forward to, and you say, oh well, I can stomach that first matchup. But in this case, with the Cubs going on the road, playing a couple of American League teams, maybe they're not that familiar with him. At Cleveland, at Detroit, seems like a pretty decent matchup for him.
What's funny is that all the outings that got gombered this year have been where the two start. The first outing was the bad one. And then somehow they all turned it around, and they all had fantastic outings in their second one, and they all won their games. We're talking Gomber, talking Joe Ross. For the week overall, their earned runs were horrible, but, if you were interested in the wins, you actually got a win out of each of them.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. And, you look at, too, when pitchers face the same team twice in a row, how different the results are so many times. I mean, you could get shelled by a team one time and then come back and shut them out. It's pretty amazing how often that happens.
Yeah, that is very surprising, actually. A couple of mailbag questions. First from Jacob. He says, how would you go about judging a trade mid-season? That's a very, very general question. How would you tackle that, Steve?
Well, I think if the general rule of thumb is if it makes your team better, even just a little bit, then you have to think about making that trade. You look at the entire season as one where you try and incrementally increase the value of your team. And the one thing I think you have to be on the lookout for at mid-season, or that point in the season, is look at what the player is going to do going forward rather than what they have already done, because those stats are already in the book. You're not getting those stats. So what will the player do going forward? Look at the current trends, look at how his team is playing, those sorts of things, and don't think that just because you trade for a guy that he's going to do exactly what he did in the first half.
Yeah, well, you buy low, sell high, right? Ruvain, anything to add?
Yes, you have to make sure your team you feel the needs that you have. That's number one. That's obviously one of the main things everyone has to look for. But at the same point, you have to make sure that what you're trading away doesn't hurt you in the future. Like, let's say you have a stolen base guy that you want to trade away, and you're second or third in stolen bases. If you're trading it to a guy who is, let's say, 3 spots below you and could end up passing you because of that, I'd be a little wary trading to that person unless it feels a glaring need that you have. But otherwise, you have to make sure that you help yourself more than you hurt yourself when you actually trade to the team that you're trading to.
I'll add a couple things. First of all, I would worry less about the other guy and more about you in terms of how it gains. Like, maybe a trade that you would make would help the other player more than it would help you. But if it's still a net gain for you, you should still do it, right? Who cares if the other guy is helping him more, but if it still helps you, you should do it. You have to look at with the replacement level, the replacement value is. If you're in a trade, if you're trading somebody for somebody else, you're going to have a downgrade for the player that you're trading away, and you're having an upgrade for the incoming player. You have to not just compare the two players being traded, compare, okay, if I trade this guy, who is replacing him from the bench, right? So if you have a third baseman, well, who's coming in from the bench? You look at that drop in value. And then you compare it to, okay, well, I'm now incoming a person, but who is he replacing in the lineup? And see what the increase is from those two people. What you're comparing is not the two people being traded, it's the value of the increase you're getting and versus the value of the decrease that you're giving up. That's how I evaluate trades mid-season. Of course, not just value in total, but you also want to look at the categories. How many points am I standing to gain by the increase in the categories versus how many points am I losing from the outgoing? So those are how you would judge it, and it doesn't have to be equal in value. It just has to help your team in the standings. A little bit easier to judge trades later in the season in terms of how it helps you or not. In the beginning of the season, I would still base it on value. Look at total projections rest of season and do the math in terms of dollar value. One other question from DP Chillin. He says, is Yusei Kikuchi closer to an ace than to a 4th-5th starter? He says, I think so. He's been dealing and going distance. I say, you say, we all let him loose. Well, I'm going to disagree with that. I don't think he's an ace. What do you say about Yusei?
I think, he, number one, had the hard luck of being the other pitcher in the game that John Means threw his no-hitter the other day. So, I mean, he had a quality start in that game, but nobody's going to remember it because his team got no hits. But I think Kikuchi is a solid pitcher who I would roster in mixed leagues. And I think, he's getting the ball up there like a 95 mile per hour average velocity. The problem that he's run into is that he's getting killed by the home run. 6 of them in 37 and 2/3 innings pitched so far this season. And this is from a guy who's really a ground ball pitcher. And so when he's getting killed by the home runs, that's something you have to be at least somewhat concerned about. But because he's a good ground ball pitcher, you figure that he ought to be able to turn that around. And so the inflated ERA may not be as bad going forward as it has been so far.
I think he's a 4th-5th starter. I mean, he has actually been lucky. His BABIP this season is 237, which actually means he's been lucky on the ground balls. They're being scooped up. So his inflated ERA, maybe because of the homers, but it's actually being lucky based on the hits. He is a player that there's a very large discrepancy in projections. Steamer has him projected at 3.86 ERA going forward. The Bat has him at 4.65. In terms of what I used to say preseason, ATC would call it a high interprojectional standard deviation. Preseason, he had a standard deviation of 5, meaning projections do not agree on him. He's a risky player in terms of we just don't know what his true outcome is. Projections disagree what his true value is. Everyone agrees actually he has a whip somewhat a little bit north of 1.3. So to me, call it a low 4s ERA with a 1.3 whip. If he goes late into games, he could be a starter. He's like Marco Gonzalez, if you think about it. He's really similar profile-wise. And Marco Gonzalez, to me, is a 4th-5th starter. Maybe in leagues that reward wins, maybe a little bit more because he can, and not losses, he can actually gain some wins because he has length. But he's like Marco Gonzalez to me. It's a 4th-5th starter. He's not even close to an ace. Do you disagree, Ruben?
No, I don't disagree. Unless you're in a league where they get points for the amount of innings he pitches, he's going to pitch a lot of innings, but I'm just going to echo what you guys said. He's got a home run to fly ball rate of 23.1, which is crazy high, and with that low whip and that low BABIP, it's going to normalize, and that whip is going to go up, that ERA may go up also. He only has an 8K per 9, which is not that great, so I don't know what you're really getting from him. He's not going to be an ace. He's a good spot starter. He's a good possible 2-star pitcher once in a while, but otherwise, I don't think he's anywhere near an ace.
Well, sorry, DP Chillin, we really don't agree with you. But thank you for the question and comment. And that brings us to injuries Ruvain update. Well, this year you got plenty of work to do, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's extremely very busy. Um, I'll start with Yadier Molina. He's on the IL with a strained tendon in his right foot. He has been cleared to resume some baseball activity. That doesn't mean all baseball activity, so he's still a while away. I mentioned Bryce Harper earlier. He's only played once in the last 8 games, and to me, it looks increasingly like he may end up on the IL. So look for that to happen. George Springer, he re-injured his quad that he injured when he was rehabbing his oblique injury. The GM, not the manager, the GM said it's going to be longer than a 10-day stint, so make sure you have your replacements ready. The GM for the Blue Jays also mentioned about Alejandro Kirk that he has a left hip flexor strain and will miss at least 4 weeks, but he said he's very excited to see Reese McGuire play. We'll see about that. Aaron Boone says from the Yankees that Luis Severino is beginning to pitch against live hitters this coming week. That's something to watch for. Carlos Carrasco, this is very interesting. Everyone thought he was going to be activated in a week or two. They put him on the 60-day IL, which means the earliest he can be activated is May 31st. Why are they doing this? Did he have a setback? It doesn't sound like he had a setback. It just sounds like they're being extra cautious with him. Christian Yelich, back soreness, back on the IL. One of his managers in the minors before, Andy Haynes, actually said that he always had this occasional back stiffness. It goes all the way back to the time he was in the minors, but not like this. He said it's a little bit different, and the quote is he's hungry for answers. He actually wants to know what's going on. Brett Anderson, he's on the IL with a hamstring issue. He completed a bullpen session this week. There's still no timeline when he's going to come back. Jake Odorizzi, a forearm injury. The GM said he's trending toward maybe needing a rehab start or two before being activated, so keep that in mind. Brandon Nimmo had injured his finger when he swung a bat. He left index finger. He has a bone bruise. There you go, contusion, bone bruise. Kevin Pillar, who's been red hot, if he's available in any of your leagues, pick him up because he's taking all the time there. Anthony Rendon, I mentioned him a couple times. He was placed on the IL with that left knee contusion after fouling the ball off his leg. MRI was normal, but there's no word on when he's going to return. Diego Castillo, groin injury. He was put on the IL with groin tightness. There's no word of how bad it is or when it happened, but the recently activated Pete Fairbanks, who may be available in a lot of your leagues because people may have dropped him already. Take a look because he may fill in for the closer as for the Rays. And Roberto Perez, he was placed on the IL with a non-displaced fracture in his right ring finger. He at first said he was going to try to play through it. That didn't work out. Fractures usually take 3 to 5 weeks to heal. A guy who may be available in a lot of leagues, you may want to take a dollar waiver on, Austin Hedges. He may fill in there for the time being.
Steve, question. You have a Hall of Fame vote now, right?
I do. Yes, I do.
All right. You mentioned Yadier Molina. I'm assuming, is he a Hall of Famer for you?
He is, wow, a lot of debate about that. For me, I think he's on the borderline. And I mean, catchers these days, we're asking them to be offensive players as well as great defensive players. We've seen, Joe Mauer. We've seen Buster Posey win MVP awards mostly for their bats. I think if Yachty is somebody who makes it in, it's mostly for his glove. And because his bat was, while okay, wasn't anything special. I think this is one of those cases where you look at the numbers and it really doesn't tell you everything about Yadier Molina. I'm leaning at this point to say yes, but it's certainly a borderline case for me.
Who has more homers, if you can guess? Salvador Perez or Yadier Molina?
I would say Molina probably because Perez is still a young guy, relatively speaking.
So Salvador Perez has only 6 less homers than Yadier Molina for his career, and he's 9 years younger. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Do you think Salvador Perez is on the trajectory of making the Hall of Fame? And I'll say this, that according to Baseball Reference, Yadier Molina has a career WAR of 41. Salvador Perez has a career WAR of 25. And probably better offensive numbers. If you go 4 years of him playing at this level, he'll probably surpass them. Other than batting average, Molina has a 282 career batting average. Is Salvador Perez, if he keeps this up for the next 5-6 years, is he a Hall of Famer to you?
I don't picture him that way. I mean, he's got a World Series ring, so that's a notch in his favor. But I don't know that I've ever really considered him to be an elite catcher. Defensively, maybe so offensively, but he's got to do more. I mean, he's got to have a late career peak before I think Joe Mauer deserves to be in, and Buster Posey maybe ahead of Salvador Perez.
I think that if Molina makes it, I think Perez is going to be very similar. I mean, obviously not as good at defensive, but far better offensive than Molina.
Yeah,
on
and
the
I
whole.
also think Salvador Perez may end up breaking the home run record for catchers. That's a possibility. He's still young, and he's been playing as a DH. I know they may not count as home runs. That was a whole issue with Piazza getting the home run record because he was hitting them as DH. But you know what? If he gets close to that record, how can you not put him in? Because what's the criteria for catchers if you're not going to put him in? I mean, if Molina goes in, Molina's not going to hit more than another 40, 50 home runs in his career. I mean, what would be the benchmark for catchers to get in at this point then?
That's the same argument we see for Jeff Kent too, making it as a second baseman. You know, where do you draw that line if you're the best or you have the most of this particular stat? It's a good question.
Yeah, just keep in mind Salvador Perez. He's not going to break Mike Piazza. Piazza has 427 homers. He's not going to come anywhere close to that. But he's going to have quite a bit for a catcher, Salvador Perez. Yeah. Well, this is a fantastic episode. We covered a lot of baseball, fantasy baseball, lineups, just a lot of great stuff. And thank you so much, Steve, for coming on the show. Can you tell everybody where we can read your stuff, follow you, and all things Steve Gardner?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Steve A. Gardner, and you can find my work if you like the print medium. You'd like to check out my column, fantasy baseball column I write for USA Today Sports Weekly. You can find that on newsstands, and you can find me in the pages of USA Today every once in a while, writing about mostly baseball, but occasionally fantasy, and on usatoday.com. Just go to mlb.usatoday.com or fantasy.usatoday.com, and I'm there.
And aside from being a great fantasy player and great sports writer, Steve is just one of the nicest guys. Forget about nice guys in the fantasy industry. Nicest guys I've ever met, really. If you guys don't know Steve Gardner, just a fantastic person.
You're much too kind. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. Ruvain, before we go, why don't you tell everybody where we can find your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out daily injury updates about players, how long they're going to be out, who's going to be up next. And I also have a weekly injury article for Rotoballer that comes out every Saturday and helps you prep for Fab Sunday.
And I'm Ariel Cohen. You can read my work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, CBS Sportsline, and you can follow me on Twitter at ATCNY. And, of course, you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast. We'll be back next week as well. From all of us here at Beat the Shift, thank you so much to Steve Gardner for joining the show. And to all of you, see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.